Paris in the spring of 1925 was a city caught between the exhaustion of a devastating global conflict and the desperate, glittering rush of a new era. At the center of this fractured metropolis stood a colossal iron structure originally intended to be a temporary marvel. The Eiffel Tower, erected for the 1889 World's Fair, was now 36 years old, severely rusting and bleeding the French government dry in exorbitant maintenance costs. Public opinion was fiercely divided, with prominent architectural voices regularly calling for its immediate demolition. It was an environment perfectly ripe for exploitation, a landscape where the impossible seemed merely a matter of bureaucratic paperwork. A short, seemingly innocuous article buried in the back pages of a Parisian newspaper casually mentioned the staggering financial burden of keeping the monument painted and structurally sound. For most readers, it was a dry piece of civic trivia, easily forgotten over morning coffee. But for a man named Victor Lustig, it was the meticulous blueprint for a masterpiece of deception. He did not look at the skyline and see a beloved, albeit rusting, iron monolith. He saw 7,000 tons of premium scrap metal waiting to be monetized. The sheer audacity of the thought was its very armor. Who would dare invent a lie so massive that it cast a physical shadow over the entire city? The execution of such a monumental fraud required flawless, unassailable theater. Lustig immediately commissioned a master underground printer to produce exquisite, official-looking stationery bearing the precise seal and typography of the French government. He adopted the fabricated title of Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. It was a bureaucratic designation carefully calibrated to be just obscure enough to avoid immediate scrutiny, yet important enough to command absolute deference from the civilian sector. Armed with these fabricated credentials, he drafted a highly confidential letter inviting 6 of the most prominent scrap metal dealers in Paris to a secret, high-stakes meeting. The venue he selected was the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most prestigious and opulent establishments in the capital. By framing the discussion within the velvet-lined walls of extreme luxury, rather than a sterile government office, Lustig manipulated the environmental psychology of his targets. He understood intimately that wealthy businessmen, deeply accustomed to the lucrative backroom dealings of post-war Europe, expected massive government contracts to be brokered in quiet, expensive corners. The absolute secrecy he demanded was not viewed with suspicion by these titans of industry. It was embraced as the standard, exclusive operating procedure of the elite. When the 6 dealers gathered in the private, wood-paneled suite, the self-appointed Deputy Director General delivered his pitch with solemn, perfectly rehearsed regret. The government, he explained with a heavy sigh, could no longer justify the exorbitant, escalating costs of repairing the Eiffel Tower. The agonizing political decision had been made to quietly tear it down. The rights to the scrap metal would be awarded to the highest bidder in that very room. But absolute discretion was paramount to prevent a massive public outcry before the demolition crews arrived. The men leaned in, their eyes widening at the prospect of securing the most lucrative scrap contract of the century. Among the captivated audience sitting in the Crillon suite was a man named André Poisson. Unlike his deeply entrenched peers, Poisson was a relative newcomer to the inner circles of Parisian commerce, a provincial man whose ambition vastly outpaced his established reputation. He was desperate to secure a monumental, headline-making deal that would permanently elevate his status among the city's industrial elite. Lustig, possessing the predatory intuition of a master con artist, identified this specific psychological vulnerability almost instantly. Poisson was not just hungry for a massive profit margin, he was starving for validation and a seat at the table. The brilliance of the impending scam relied entirely on isolating and exploiting that specific human frailty. Lustig separated his chosen mark from the pack, arranging a private follow-up meeting to finalize the intricate details of the winning bid. But during this intimate exchange, a sudden dangerous variable emerged. Poisson's wife, who had accompanied him, expressed sharp, unwavering reservations. She interrogated the extreme secrecy of the deal, the rushed financial timeline, and the highly irregular nature of a high-ranking government official operating entirely out of a rented hotel suite. The entire illusion teetered on the very edge of catastrophic collapse. Confronted with this sudden, piercing skepticism, an amateur fraudster would have panicked, perhaps over-explaining the false bureaucracy or attempting to forge more documents. The master fabricator instead leaned into a much darker, far more believable truth. Lustig subtly changed his entire physical demeanor. He lowered his voice, broke eye contact, and confessed with calculated hesitation that his government salary was woefully inadequate for the lavish lifestyle he was expected to maintain in his position. He hinted, playing the part of a nervous bureaucrat, that the winning bid could be absolutely guaranteed, provided a certain secondary financial arrangement was made. This quiet confession of standard political corruption was the ultimate devastating stroke of genius. Suddenly, the strange secrecy and the hotel suite meetings made perfect logical sense to the anxious businessman. Poisson was no longer dealing with a mysterious, aloof government entity operating in the shadows. He was dealing with a greedy, predictable bureaucrat actively looking for a bribe. It was a familiar, comfortable dynamic in the business world of 1925. The Mark eagerly handed over not only a massive certified check for the scrap metal rights, but a secondary, heavy briefcase stuffed with untraceable cash to secure the illicit favor. Within hours of the lucrative exchange, the Deputy Director General completely vanished from the French capital. Lustig boarded a luxury express train bound for Vienna, clutching a fortune that would be worth millions today. He fully expected the front pages of the Parisian newspapers to explode with the scandal of the century within a matter of days. He spent his time in a lavish Austrian hotel, meticulously scouring the international press over morning coffee, waiting for the inevitable massive manhunt to begin. Yet the explosive headlines never materialized. The absolute silence that followed was a profound testament to the crippling psychological paralysis of the victim. When André Poisson finally realized he had bought a national monument from a phantom, the devastating financial loss was immediately eclipsed by the sheer crushing weight of the humiliation. To report the crime meant confessing to the police, the press, and his ruthless business rivals that he was the most gullible man in France, and that he had actively attempted to bribe a government official. He swallowed the massive financial loss and the toxic secret whole. That deafening, unbroken silence fed a highly dangerous arrogance within the perpetrator. Most criminals, having successfully executed the heist of a lifetime without a single consequence, would disappear forever into comfortable, wealthy obscurity. But the architect of this deception possessed a pathological ego that demanded constant, escalating validation. He believed that if a lie of this staggering magnitude could be swallowed without a single ripple in the press, the very boundaries of reality were entirely negotiable for a man of his talents. Barely a month after fleeing the country, the intoxicating shadows of his previous triumph drew him back to the scene of the crime. Lustig brazenly returned to Paris, retrieved his forged government stationery from a hidden cache, and booked another luxurious suite at the Hôtel de Crillon. He meticulously compiled a fresh list of wealthy scrap metal dealers, men who had not been included in the first round of secret invitations. The setup was absolutely identical. The pitch remained unchanged, but the audacity was exponentially amplified by the sheer, reckless impossibility of a repeat performance. 6 new faces sat in the velvet chairs of the hotel suite. The tragic, rehearsed tale of the decaying tower was spun once more with the same solemn gravity. However, the delicate dynamics of deception are rarely perfectly replicable. This second batch of businessmen possessed a vastly different collective temperament. While they listened to the grand proposal with apparent polite interest, the undercurrent of unquestioning, desperate greed that had so easily doomed the first group was noticeably missing from the room. One of the new targets possessed a hardened skepticism that simply could not be neutralized by the alluring promise of a secret government contract. Instead of bringing a briefcase of cash, this businessman took the forged documents straight to the actual authorities. The Parisian police, bewildered by the sheer scale and audacity of the reported fraud, immediately launched a rapid investigation into the phantom Deputy Director General. The invisible shield of the illusion was finally irreparably pierced. Forewarned by his own hyper-vigilant survival instincts, or perhaps tipped off by a sympathetic hotel employee he had previously bribed, the con artist sensed the rapidly shifting wind. Before the detectives could even breach the ornate doors of the Creon, Lustig was already gone. He abandoned the second scam mid-execution, fleeing across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. He left behind nothing but a trail of worthless, beautifully forged paper and a precinct of deeply bewildered authorities. His arrival in America marked the beginning of a relentless, cross-country criminal career that would eventually involve counterfeiting operations massive enough to actively threaten the economy of the United States. The man who sold the Eiffel Tower would eventually cross paths with notorious syndicate leaders, evade legions of Secret Service agents, and finally meet the cold, unforgiving steel of Alcatraz. Yet, despite a lifetime of prolific criminality, it was that singular Parisian masterpiece that permanently etched his name into the highest echelons of fraudulent history. The enduring intellectual fascination with this specific historical event lies not merely in the flawless mechanics of the forgery, but in the brutal, surgical exposure of human desire. It definitively demonstrates that the most devastatingly effective lies are never built on flawless, impenetrable logic. They are built on a profound, empathetic understanding of what the target desperately wants to be true. The victim in that hotel room did not actually buy thousands of tons of rusting iron. He bought the intoxicating promise of prestige, the thrilling rush of the inside track, and the powerful illusion of his own importance. The legacy of 1925 remains an unparalleled masterclass in the weaponization of perception and trust. It serves as a chilling, timeless reminder that unquestioned authority is very often just a matter of confident posture and expensive, well-printed stationery. The great iron monolith still stands today, casting its long, intricate shadow over the Champ de Mars. It remains a silent, enduring witness to the day a man armed with absolutely nothing but audacity and psychological insight proved that even the most unmovable fixtures of reality can be sold to a willing mind.